If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Hunters, what did you see out there that made you not want to go back into the woods? So I have two stories. First, the not so creepy one. I was about 20 miles out in the back country on a week-long hunting trip. By myself. Woke up in the middle of the night to a bear sticking its snout into the fabric of my tent. I immediately started meditating to slow my breath and just weather the situation. Because I knew if I moved or made a run for my car I'd be dead. The next morning I found some paw prints and they were the biggest bear prints I've ever seen. Second. Very creepy story. Was deep in the woods this time too. Set up camp in a very nice little ravine. When I woke up there was a ring of big rocks around my camping area. They weren't there when I got there / set up camp. I'm also a stout dude and I couldn't move any of the rocks. I was raised in the woods and now I refuse to go out there without a large caliber gun and I refuse to sleep out in the woods anymore. One of my experiences happened on family-owned land in North Carolina where I used to live. I still hunt so it never kept me from going again. We called it the noise. To this day if you ask people who live or lived adjacent to the land about it they know exactly what you are talking about. Whatever it is was very loud and very fast. It was like a very loud primal scream. First time I heard it I was hunting with my dad and brother. We were stalk hunting and very slowly and methodically moving through the forest. I noticed everything had gotten oddly quiet. Only thing you heard was the water running over the rocks in the creek. My dad stopped us and said to hold still and not to move. As soon as we stopped it screamed behind us. It was so loud it made my ears ring. My dad never showed fear and was always rational. He looked very nervous and I'm ready to shit on myself. My brother has his gun shouldered looking around trying to spot it just to see what it is and make sure it isn't close. Then it screams again. Now it seems closer and in front of us. My dad puts his hand on my shoulder and just says run for the car now. I jump up like a scared rabbit and run as fast as my legs will carry me. We are all running and we can hear this thing screaming as we run like it's keeping pace easily. I can see the gravel road ahead and know the car is close. It lets out another scream that sounds like it's to my left now and very close. I bolt right and we all come sliding out onto the road about 100 yards above the car. That's when I hear this weird whistle from the woods and then everything just goes back to normal. Birds chirping away, squirrels calling, crows cawing. We stop to catch our breath and uneasily walk to the car ready for anything. 100 yards never seems so far away. That wasn't the last time I heard it. My family tried to find it for years to figure it out. When we thought we were close it would be somewhere else. Even trained hunting dogs ran away from this thing. Weird stuff, but I still love to hunt. The way I figure if something gets me while I'm hunting at least I'm doing something I love and being close to nature. I harvest her bounty and thank her for it. One day my body will feed her and the animals I hunted. My buddy and I decided to do a Halloween ride up a supposedly haunted trail at night. As we were making our way back to the main road I see a car parked to the right side of the trail with the lights on. I thought it was kind of weird that I would see a sedan parked in a dirt road so far out in the middle of nowhere. We pull ahead of the car and stop our bikes. When we look back there was nothing. No car. Just darkness. I could see how wide my friend's eyes were from inside his helmet. I asked him if he saw a car parked to the side. He said yes. Then I got the most uncomfortable chilly feeling and my eyes began to water. I felt like I was going to cry and I felt every goosebump on my skin. I remember the sound or the lack of it. No animals, no insects, I just heard the ringing in my ear. My friend told me that we had to leave but I couldn't move. I think I was in shock or something. He told me again and this time I heard the fear in his voice. He sounded like a little kid. We both hopped on our bikes and rode as quickly as we could back onto the main road. Me and my friends were going through this trail at night in a very dense forest. Everyone went quiet for literally no reason. I asked what was wrong. Everyone just said they felt strange, like something bad was about to happen. It sure did, because I stopped in the middle of the road, just at the very edge of the darkness my lights were. A very weird figure ran from one side to the other. It was not human. I will say that, just because it didn't look like someone running, it was a shadowy figure and it ran across in a very fluid motion. I don't know if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I asked my friends, they said they all saw it. Now here's the most stupid thing I ever did as a skeptic of paranormal. I got out my car. Immediately, complete silence. No birds, nothing. In pitch black. I hear a crumple of leaves in the distance, so I got my phone's flashlight out and pointed in at the direction. What I saw next I have had nightmares about and I rarely talk about it. It was absolutely just something that shouldn't have happened. I saw an arm around a tree in the distance. It was not human, at all. Then it disappeared. I said nothing, and I couldn't feel anything. I casually walked to my car, and didn't say a word to my friends. I put my foot down as fast as possible. Got on a main road and connected up with the motorway. My friends asked me what happened multiple times. I pulled up in a services, and I turned back and just said I saw an arm wrapped around a tree. That wasn't human. We hardly talk about it, and it's the creepiest thing ever. When I was younger, my dad told me this story from a hunting trip he went on in the Appalachian Mountains. He spent the majority of the day without seeing a thing and was ready to pack it up and leave when a white-tailed deer showed up. He shot it, but it ran away and he had to track it down. About half an hour later, he came across the downed animal after following a very distinct blood trail. Shortly after he began field dressing the deer, a group of 4 armed men in regular clothing walking through the forest approached him. He always describes them as mountain men when he tells the story. Anyways, one of the men told my dad that the deer was their kill and that he should leave. My dad, never one for confrontation, argued that he had just shot it and that he followed the blood trail all the way to the deer. At this point, the men unslung their rifles and pointed them at my dad, telling him that these are their mountains and that they'll be taking the deer. They made claims that people have hunting accidents all the time and how unfortunate it would be for him to have one. He left and called the police, which resulted in the responding officer telling my dad that there was nothing they could do about it because they don't want to have a fight on their hands with the locals. East Tennessee, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't told this to anyone but my brother because he knows where this place is. There are remote cypress swamps along the Pearl River in central Mississippi, and some of them become inaccessible due to flooding during hunting season. The remoteness of some of these places create ideal situations for a hunter willing to put in the extra effort, and I have hunted these woods and swamps for years and know them well. Even though it's a bad idea, when I was younger I was confident enough to hunt back in there alone. One afternoon during duck season, a front was coming in and I knew if I could get to Deal Island that it would be a good day. I put on my chest waders and rode my 4-wheeler down an overgrown logging trail in the swamp to the edge of the flood. I waited a couple of sloughs and got to a particular honey hole where I could slay them. I did, and it was good. But when it came time to wade back out, I got a sense of unease that I could not explain. The weather was odd because even though the temp was dropping and a front was expected, everything was absolutely still and quiet. If you have ever been alone in a swamp at night you will know what I mean, but everything is different when you can only see what's in the cone of light from your flashlight. I wasn't worried because my light was good and, hell, I was carrying a 12-gauge shotgun. But, still, something kept making the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I was being watched and I could feel it. Sound carries funny in the swamp, but the sloshing noises I was making was the only thing I could hear. It was echoing back to me in funny ways, and when I stopped to adjust the strap on the bag of decoys, the sloshing echo did not stop when it should have. Okay. There is something else in the swamp. No big deal. Some deer or hog will realize I am human in a minute and move away. Except it didn't. I would move for a bit and then stop and listen. The sound of something else out there would also stop, but it was getting closer. Not normal. The cone of my flashlight made the trees and tangled brush cast long, scraggly shadows that moved with me as I tried to hurry out of the swamp. My knuckles were turning white on that Remington 870 and I was wishing it was loaded with something heftier than No. 2 steel shot. I noticed a very bad smell, like skunk except much worse, and stopped again to listen and shine my light around. I noticed how the shadows continued to move, but holy ducking crap, I'm not moving. Why are the goddamn shadows moving? A limb snapped and when I spun around to face it, something that was not there made a soft hissing noise. The beam of my light just ended in a shape of nothingness that was not there. A breath of stench hit my face and I heard that hissing sound again and I got the duck out of that swamp. I was shaking and drenched in sweat when I got back to the truck, and those woods did not feel like my woods anymore. When I say it was something that was not there, that is the only way I can describe it. My light hit it, and there was shadow behind it, but there was nothing there. Something in that swamp scared the crap out of me, and I do not want to know what it was. The woods of Mississippi are something else. Certainly malevolent and menacingly in their own right. Grew up hiking out by the river in the old burnt-out plantations. But the swamps? I don't go into those. That can be someone else's funeral. I'm a Cherokee. My grandmother was full and she said those swamps house an evil that should never see daylight. I grew up on the New Mexico reservation. I'm white, my stepfather is Navajo. Anyway. It's really rocky desert, mountain-like area. Like the Grand Canyon but smaller. No white people go out there. The Navajos back then really hated white people. You can walk all day and never see anyone. I was on my horse hunting and came to this circle-like depression in the sandstone and sand like someone made it a long time ago. There was no sound from animals around it, no lizards on the rocks, no bugs. It was scaring the crap out of my horse. He was screaming, jumping, kicking, and I couldn't get him to calm down. So I got him away from there and tied him up to a pinyon tree in sight. I went to check it out with a weapon, of course. It was just a big circle about a foot deep, and it looked like something was built there but very, very long ago. I came back with friends and their horses and dogs. The horses did the same thing and the dogs just stayed on top of the hill whining. No one had any idea what it was, but when we told our parents, we were told to stay away from it. The only thing I could find out was that the Navajos and other Indians would put people and children who could not contribute to the tribe in a pit-like circle to die from the elements. A long time ago, if you were crippled or mentally challenged and couldn't hunt or farm, no one was going to support you or take care of you. In the 70s and 80s growing up, I had hours of chores every day, even though I was going to school too. Exploring out there was amazing. I've seen things that no one would believe. In high school, my buddies and I used to boat at Lake Powell during the summers, would camp at Lone Rock and hang out in Page, Arizona at night. One night a local took us to the trading post on the edge of a reservation down there. On the way, our teenage tour guide was trying to spook us with some crazy native stories, telling us about the old medicine men and the Lone Rider. We had already heard of some bad omens, like a coyote crossing your path, but none of us were very superstitious. When we arrive, we find ourselves around several abandoned buildings, half falling apart but still had a few walls standing. It was dark at 2 a.m., but you could see some graffiti and broken bottles on the ground. The structures weren't very tall, but instead were built down into holes in the ground. One building, we're told, was where a child had died after being locked in when her parents left and never returned. We all feel a little eerie but jokingly try to startle each other or pretend we heard something from inside one of the dark buildings. The local who took us out there was playing along, until she bolted for the car and screamed at us to get in, so we did. We peel out, and once we're back on the road we are asking what happened, but she just says she doesn't want to get in any trouble, and it's bad luck to talk about it. We think she's trying to draw us into some scary story, but she is not happy and not interested in talking about it. Once we're back in town, we're all hyped up and teasing about what happened. We head to the Wahweap resort to sneak into the hot tubs. I go searching for an unlocked maid's closet in one of the buildings to find some towels, and while crossing the parking lot I see what looked to me like someone's pet husky, but it's bigger, brown, and has a smaller head. Just watching me. It's a ways away, and I figured the owner was close by, so I think nothing of it. I return with towels, and while we're all chillin' in the hot tub 5 feet apart, 2 giant owls land on the perimeter fencing behind us. Nothing too crazy, I'm the only who takes notice, but it seems a little out of sorts, and these birds are big. The next day we meet a native at the Taco Bell and we're telling him about our adventure, and he warns us of the Skinwalkers. Tells us they don't like their territory being invaded and mocked. He cautioned us that they track their enemies disguised as coyotes, or owls. Anyways, I don't go on late night reservation trips anymore. Was camping on a reservation and walked up to the lake from the campground. It was a 20-minute walk to the lake. To the left there was a destroyed and decaying elevated wooden path through a dead swamp, and to the right the pipe from the water station at the lake. When we got to the lake, all the animal noises had stopped. The lake was tan and stained and pitch black. The trees were all burned or dead, and the dock was floating, not attached to anything. We went on the dock, and while I stayed on the dock, the other two went and took the shitty one or row boat out into the water. Whole time absolute silence and my gut screaming danger. It took them a while to paddle back to the dock, but they were freaking out too. So we hightailed it out of there, and once we were halfway back we left the silence and immediately heard birds. I took a few steps back and it was basically silence. Few steps forward and birds. Not exactly an encounter, but creepy nonetheless. There are Bigfoot sightings and reports around the time I was there though, so who knows. Not a hunter but a backpacker. This story almost belongs on No Sleep, but I swear it's real. Hiking along a section of the PCT with my aunt and dog, after 3 days we found ourselves at an impassable river crossing with the dog and have to head back. Reluctant to go over the mountain passes we just did, we pulled out our map and find what seems to be an interesting trail through the Ansel Adams wilderness that will put us back where we started. We go to a resupply point, got some dinner and a shower, and ask if we can get a 4-wheeler ride up the road to the trailhead. They say nobody goes up that road and we couldn't get one, but a man on vacation with his family offers to help up out. We drive about 2 miles up the road and it proves to be so washed out, it becomes impossible to drive further, so we thank him for his help and continue on foot. We walk another 3 miles or so to the trailhead and find it completely destroyed by fallen over trees, and it looks like no one has been there for decades. Turns out this was an old logging road used in that area before it became a wilderness area 50 or 60 years ago. So we start hiking down to the trail another 4 miles until we camp for the night. Along this trail we see nothing but bear tracks and deer tracks, no people tracks, horses, or anything. We even stumble on a bear in the middle of taking a dump on the side of the trail and scare him off. From our camp the road/trail gets really tough. It was about 6 miles of climbing over giant fir trees one after another. We finally reached an opening and followed it for about another mile until amazingly we couldn't believe it, but we came up on a 2-story building way out there in the middle of nowhere, 15 miles from the nearest people and 50 from any civilization. This place was super eerie. The house was straight out of the Blair Witch, and it must have been there since before it became a wilderness area. This where thing got weird. We found a sign here for our trail that pointed directly into thick brush and bushes. This is when we knew we were a little screwed. We decided that we should just go for it anyway. We were too far to turn back now, and luckily we had a GPS to help guide us even without a trail. So we go through the bushes and follow what used to be a trail. We get about another mile or so down the trail before I notice barefoot human prints. Let me remind you that I've been seeing bear prints and cougar prints along this trail the whole time. These were human. I put my size 11 hiking shoe over it and they were the same size and shape, and asked my aunt if I was going crazy and she agreed it was human. We walked another 500 yards down the trail with human prints leading us to what looked like either a dump or a homeless camp. There was a tarp strung up, trash bags piled up, and garbage scattered all over next to the creek. Nope. Duck that. No more investigating this creepy place in the middle of nowhere. We just hiked as fast as we could, continuing up the hill and away from that place as possible, with the eerie feeling that someone was watching us for miles. We continued the way we did, hiking with no trail for another 12 miles until we reached a maintained trail on the other side of the pass along some really pretty areas that probably haven't been seen in years. But seeing a homeless/Bigfoot camp in the middle of nowhere was not one of them. Live in North Texas near a large wildlife refuge and a lake bigger than my hometown. One night I had a fantastic idea to go down the long gravel road to the dock with a female friend of mine. I'm from Texas, so I usually carry, but opted to leave my gun locked in the glove box by the gate. About 30 yards into the trek, the road was about 200 yards to the dock, I hear an unnerving noise on my left. It was as if the earth itself growled and rumbled at me. I looked around frantically, trying to pinpoint the sound. Nothing. We stood still, waiting for it to resume. Instead we hear just heavy footsteps, not crashing or rustling like a bear or a pig does, but heavy pacing. I turn to my friend and ask if she wants to go back. She didn't know, but wanted to get out of there. So we keep on our journey to the dock with the unnatural growling/rumbling following us, coupled with the heavy paces. I'm terrified by this point, instinctively reaching for my right hip to find a blank space where a holster should be. I had left my pistol locked in the glove box. I grab my pocket knife, and palm it aggressively. The rumbling continues, almost impacting the air with its weight. We hasten our pace and it matches ours, but never coming out of the woods to show itself. This continues for about 300 yards. The entire time I am absolutely terrified. I've been hunting and camping since I was 6 and I've never heard a sound like this one or even had an experience similar. Finally, arriving to the dock, she sprints out to the edge and I grab a handful of rocks and go sit beside her. For the next 15 minutes it circles the area around the dock landing, emanating the rumbles and growls. Nothing we can do, it's dark, I have no firearm and we can't see it. I call my buddy Dennis who lives 5 minutes away. The rumbling and pacing continues, roughly 30 to 40 yards away from us, but it doesn't step foot on the dock. Finally I see headlights come up over the trees and the rumbling fades into darkness. Dennis comes walking down, cradling a rifle, and that was the end of that. Really freaked me out for a couple of months. I'm a believer in cryptozoology now. I don't know if Bigfoot exists, but something does that may be similar, especially considering most cultures have their monster. Not a hunter but live in Finland, so it's pretty much all forest here. When I was a kid I went for cross-country biking nearby to our home. There is a roughly 2 kilometers, 1,5 miles, loop of a forest path in the forest. It is ride-able if a bit difficult at some points. After just riding couple of minutes on a narrow forest path I see a figure walking ahead of me. It looks like a hooded elderly lady walking really slowly. I cannot see her face or anything, just a dark hood covering her. I recall she being very tall, but I was also just 13 years old, so she could have been normal size. I drove just behind her, but the path is too narrow to overtake her from any of her sides. Also I get this heavy feeling on my chest telling me not to try to overtake her. I can't explain it, but something just felt very off when I got closer to her. I stop my bike and get off and watch her walk ahead of me. I then think that this is silly and she must be startled if she turns around and sees me there. So I think to act cool and turn down to pick up a blueberry. I pick it up, raise my head back to the road ahead of me, and there is nothing. I can see the path ahead maybe 50 meters, and it's just impossible that she would have never done that distance within those 5 seconds I wasn't watching. I then try to reason this with and think that she must have jumped off-road, since there is extremely thick bushes and I cannot see there. I felt a bit uneasy about this but decide to continue. I ride my bike about 500 meters more and there is a cliff where I can see down the road ahead another 500 meters. And there she is. I can see her walking there again really slowly. Again, tall figure covered in a dark hood. I cannot see her face or anything but the hood she is wearing. And she is walking slowly on the road. I really couldn't figure out how she made it there in such a short time, since even I couldn't do the distance in that time even with my bike. I am extremely alarmed at this point but decide to continue. I drive the hill down into the spot where I saw her before. Again there is nothing. At this part of the forest it is more open and I can see quite far in any direction. Yet she is nowhere to be seen, and yet there she was just 30 seconds before. I continue my trip and finally finish my first loop of the trail and decide to go yet another round. After going for a couple of minutes there she is, exactly the same spot I saw her at the first time, again tall dark hooded. Walking slowly. I got totally freaked out after this. I rode off the woods as fast as I could and in a total panic ride to my friend's home, which was further away from the woods than my own home. Until today I have no idea what I saw and it gives me the chills when I remember her figure. I'm not a hunter or anything, but my boyfriend is, but these stories are not about hunting. Where my mom's house is, there is a river that runs behind it with nothing but forest surrounding it. Some truly creepy shit has happened to us and some friends more than once down there at the river. We're in the trail of the river. We were walking down to the river. It was midsummer and a lot of people were down there. We were looking forward to swimming and having a fun time. We get halfway down the trail, and we all see a solid black wolf sitting in the middle of the trail near the end of it, facing us. I remember it clearly. It has yellow eyes, and gray around its snout, like it was older. This was at 12 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. on a bright, sunny day and people were in the water. You could hear them laughing and splashing. We all stop in our tracks and stare at it. About 5 people just staring in silence at this black wolf, scared to move or make any noise. It stares at us back. And I shit you not, it ducking grinned at us. Not a typical dog grin where they pant and have their mouth open. No, this was more like a sinister, mischievous grin with sharp teeth and bright yellow eyes. It made my stomach turn. We were about 50 feet from it, and after about 5 minutes it stopped grinning, and it simply got up on its hind legs and walked away as if it was a human. We all just looked at each other, asking if we all saw it, and everyone saw the exact same thing. I believe we came across a skinwalker that day. I didn't tell my friends that's what it was, but I knew that's what it was. We said screw swimming that day and left. That was the last time we ever went to that river again. I was heading out to an abandoned farmhouse to hang out and drink some beers with 4 friends. Dark as hell in the middle of the woods. You have to follow the old overgrown driveway that starts where the road ends like a mile back. You can't drive back there anymore, it's like 30 years overgrown. The house belonged to the parents of the next closest house that's about 3 miles away as the crow flies. I know them, and they're okay with us going back there, so we weren't trespassing. Anyway, we're walking back there with a couple flashlights and we were loud and should have scared any wildlife off well before we got close to see anything. Out of nowhere there's this giant ghost dog the size of a side-by-side ATV. I mean full-on blue-green glowing kinda shaggy dog in the middle of the woods. This animal is huge, no bears in that part of the country either, which is the only thing I could compare it to size-wise. And we were close before we saw it, maybe 20 to 30 yards, it was just there. Its movements were loud against the ground and brush, but made no sound itself. You could feel it move. We stopped, it paused, looked at us and ran off. Then it was just gone, like it only ran maybe 10 to 15 yards before just nothing. We turned tail and noped the hell out of there. We did go back, during the day. Not sure what we were looking for evidence-wise, but we never did find anything. I never went back there in the dark though. I'm a rational person, I acknowledge I have a limit to my intelligence and experience. I've seen shit I cannot rationally explain. This, by far, I had no frame of reference for. Not me but my father who passed away. My family used to go huckleberry picking up in the mountains in the late 80s early 90s. My family was up a mountain in Washington along with some extended family members picking away when they heard screaming out in the woods. Now, my father has always been a hunter and has lived through and seen a lot, including facing death more than once. Well, he decided to go check it out and told the family to stay put. He grabs his .32-06 and goes towards the screaming. After an hour or so, he walks back to the picking area, face completely white, from what my siblings said. We're Asian, hard-working kind, so white is not a color for us to easy produce on our skin cause we're slightly tan. The only thing my father says is to pack up, we're leaving. That was it. No one said anything, everyone packed up and left. My father never mentioned what he saw or talked about it, and he and my family never went back there. We stopped picking completely. What I find scary is he still went out hunting deep in the woods, but never ever to that area and never allowed my brothers to go there as well. My people are shamanistic/animistic people, so he definitely saw something, just not sure what and what could ever make him that afraid. I was all cuddled up and cozy in a deer stand by 5 a.m. one morning, December 2014 in Northwest Ohio. I was with my grandfather, and this is a yearly tradition of ours. We knew we wouldn't be able to see anything for another hour or two, but we decided to get out before the sun rise. We enjoyed the quiet forest until the sun rose about 2 hours later, and we could begin to see far enough for a decent shot. Thanks to the fact that we got out there early, the ground 30 feet below us was littered with animals who didn't know we were there. We saw some foxes, some black bears, even some deer, although not worthy of a shot according to Gramps. None of these animals knew of our presence, except one foul creature that haunts me to this day. We saw the dog-looking creature. It was probably some sort of sick coyote, slowly limp its way over the hill right towards us. From afar I thought it was a wolf trying to sneak up on something. It was pretty big, and was walking slowly. It walked right underneath our stand and then ducking looked at us. What was terrible about this thing was that it was hairless, had a mentally unstable psychotic look in its eyes, and limped for a good 3 minutes over the hill just to ducking get underneath us and look up at us. Its large tongue hung out from its noticeably large teeth. It was sickly and hairless yet muscular and bony. Eventually it walked away, but holy ducking shit, something about this animal sent shivers down my spine. I asked my grandpa what he thought about it and he said, "I don't think about things like that." Gee, thanks Gramps, I'll just bottle it up and hope I don't run into that thing ever again. I have two, but they aren't mine. So used to fight forest fires in the Pacific Northwest of the US. My buddy was a native and this is his story and his dad's. He was a fellow firefighter and his dad was also a FF buff. He was higher up in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, so one day dad was down sitting in his truck doing paperwork when he sees all these headlamps come bobbing down the hill toward his truck. It is dusk and he is wondering what they are doing. Being a good boss, he begins to give them the what for leaving the fire line, but they are genuinely upset and scared. Of course, he didn't believe them, that they had seen a Sasquatch, but they refused to go back. So, anyway, he drives up there and has one of those spotlights that the police have on the A-pillar of his truck. So he gets up to the fire and slowly pans around. He thinks he sees something and pans back. There was a Sasquatch that is standing still at a profile to the truck, slowly turns its head, looks at boss man, and slowly walks off. Story 2. So my buddy is up on the backside of Mount Adams. Beautiful area. It is part of the Native American reservation and this part is off limits to the white man. He is up there camping with his girlfriend, I think his kid and their dog. They are setting up camp when the dog starts freaking out and keeps jumping into the truck. Thanks Cujo, you worthless mutt, for protecting us. Should have been a sign. Then. They smell it. Imagine urine sitting out on a hot day for a week mixed with hair that hadn't been washed in a decade along with BO from never having taken a bath since you fell in the lake by accident when you were 6, traumatizing you, which makes you never want to take a bath for the rest of your life, or in other words, a homeless meth addict from Seattle. When my buddies smelled that, they grabbed their tent and in one motion scooped it up, chucked it in the back of the truck fully set up and hightailed it out there. They never did see anything, but they did smell him. Rumor has it the Sasquatch smell so bad because they are like us but never bathe, so the homeless is a good description. My father and I were following a trail for a while, so we decided to take a break and catch our breaths. I sat on a log off the trail and my dad stood on the edge of the trail waiting for me to get up. I hear some movement and scan around and I see a man, dressed casually, walking quickly down the trail with a Glock in his hand. He is not really following the trail, he is just walking toward my dad with haste. Before he comes up to my dad, he asks if he's seen anything pretty normal. I keep an eye on him because I don't believe he was there to hunt. I think he was there to make sure my dad hadn't seen anything he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't dressed like a hunter, he didn't walk like a hunter, and it was deer season and he decided he would take his Glock out to get a deer. I wasn't buying, so I put a round in the chamber and watched them talk. He seemed to be confident until my dad mentioned that he was here with me and gestured in my direction. I nodded and made a half-assed wave. And he seemed to lose interest in us and ended the conversation shortly after and turned around and walked back the way he came, just about as fast as he walked up to us. It worried us a bit, but we continued on. We haven't been back to that area in a while. My dad told me that there have been drug busts near that area in the past. This isn't a supernatural tale, just an experience that made me not want to go back to that area. When I was a kid, a poacher must have thought I was a deer or something and shot a round at me. It impacted on a tree above my head. I immediately fired 3 shots as fast as I could, not at the shooter but in the air. In my hunting group, immediate 3 shots means help basically. My dad and our hunting club immediately came out to find out what the duck happened by honking the horns of their trucks letting me know they were coming. I basically laid on the ground until I could tell they were near the dirt road. Told them what happened and guessed it was probably a road poacher trying to get a deer as it came from the same road. They didn't see him. It was private property and we were always very aware of who was at what location and who was hunting where. Nobody was supposed to be in the part I was at. Scared the shit out of me. This was mid-90s. Reason why I don't like hunting on public property is cause of that, and I don't know the people out there. To begin, I'll admit that we were hiking, not hunting. I was with my brother-in-law. In the Appalachians, it's usually snowy in December, but that year it was a constant 40°F or so, and too foggy to see very well. We made our way into a dense rainforest area and found what looked like an extremely overgrown, rarely trodden erosion forming a path. This didn't make sense. It was on the back of an inconvenient mountain peak, very craggy, and not on the way to anywhere, not even another trail. So we followed it. The deciduous canopy lay rotting on the winter ground, but little sunlight broke through anyway due to the deep fog and mountain shadow. It felt haunted. We descended into a hollow with a small creek at the bottom, and rounded a bend into a dense clump of rhododendron. Inside this rhododendron brush, we started to see weird things, like decaying rope, rusted metal, paracord, and supplies. Then the trail ended. Between 2 oak trees that formed a window through the brush, we could see a rusted body of metal with face-sized holes of glass on the sides. We made out the shape of a small plane from the scattered pieces. The body was only in 2 pieces, but the wings were unrecognizable. There was a bit of graffiti on the plane, but not as much as you would expect. It had clearly been there for a while, but some of the original gear was still in the body. I wrote down the number on the side for reference. When I got home, I googled the plane number, and found a result. Accident report, March 1977, Western North Carolina. Damaged beyond repair. 1 passenger. 1 fatality. Body recovered. Plane unsalvageable. We found the plane in 2016. That wreckage had been left to rot for 39 years, and some of the gear still had not been stolen. I know it was only 1 death, but that place had a deeply unsettling aura. I am not superstitious. I do not believe in ghosts, but there was something strange about that place, and I won't forget it. I didn't crawl into the plane's body, both out of fear and because I wanted to be respectful to whoever died there. Not a hunter, but a fly fisherman who spends every weekend out hiking remote rivers and streams in search of brown trout. I live in Montreal. My normal routine is to drive down to a river that starts in upstate NY, fish a couple kilometers of the river where no one really lives or goes. Then head cross the border and head back down to the river on the Canadian side. So I'm out there on morning by myself. I had been out there over 100 times, so it wasn't new territory by any means. That said, I was getting close to the area where other anglers had warned me about angry landowners and threats from dudes with shotguns, so I was pretty alert. I come down to the section of river there it kinda splits, around a little island, 50'X100 kinda island, before it reconnects and the Who River veers off to the left. Most days I stay left of the island, there are a few holes. This day I went right, so my view up the river was obscured until I came around the corner of the island. I get to the point, look up, and about 250 feet in front of me I'm standing there looking at a beige golden animal that's crossing the river. First thought, someone's dog. No homes. Too remote of an area. I'm standing there looking at this thing crossing the river, and the things are just racing through my head because what I'm looking at doesn't make sense for where I'm standing. This thing still hasn't seen me, it's just gingerly making its way through about 1 to 2 of water trying to cross across at a determined walk. That's when I notice the tail. I know a lot of dogs, but I've never seen a tail like dash, hair on the back of my neck goes up. Duckin' shit, I'm looking at a mountain lion, in upstate NY about a kilometer from the Canadian border. I take a step back behind the tree. I stood there for another few seconds watching this thing cross. When it got to the other side it bound up a washout bank up about 20 in a couple bounds. There was no doubt about what I saw. I decide I've gone far enough for the day, start making my way back to the truck which, with the way the river bends, is pretty much in the same direction that Cat was headed. Ah, duck me. Get back in the truck, make my way home and contact NY Fish and Game. I provided some data, they say sure we'll look into it. Most buddies who I fish with out there think I'm nuts, obviously. I spend a lot of time in the backcountry in the winter time. Usually it's just me and a friend. Most trails we do are popular in the summer, and totally dead once it starts to snow. Winter in 2014, we've hiked about 2 miles in and see this small black backpack in the middle of the trail. We hadn't seen any other cars at the trailhead or any people around, but this backpack hadn't been there long because there wasn't any snow on it. It had snowed the night before. It was a very odd sight. We figured if it was still on the trail when we looped around we'd pick it up. About 4 miles in and my friend and I are chatting away when I notice a large figure flailing in some trees up ahead. We go quiet and can hear this man rambling while he's pacing. At this point we're pretty freaked out and decide to turn around when we hear "Oh Hawaii" there, and this guy starts walking towards us. And then out pops another guy with a very pricey looking video camera. It turned out this flailing guy was actually a rapper and they were filming a music video for one of his new songs out in the forest. They had parked before the trailhead so we didn't notice their car. They ended up being super friendly and gave us a card, and we figured out it was their backpack we had seen on the trail the few miles before. We said our goodbyes and walked out. But hot damn, I was sure we were about to be killed in the woods. I missed this trip with my dad and his hunting buddy. They were in a remote section of southeastern Wyoming hunting for elk. Like any good elk hunter, they were up at 3:30 to stake out their spot and watch the herd patterns before daylight. As they were driving up to the spot, a figure appeared in their headlights, and by their silhouette, it wasn't a hunter. What was a person doing walking down the road in complete darkness with no hunting gear? My dad was driving, so he slowed to a crawl in his truck, and his buddy prepared his sidearm, as this had foul play written all over it. When they could distinguish the figure in the headlights, they saw it was a girl in a tank top and underwear, wearing no shoes on. They stopped and verbally checked her status out the window, as there could have easily been somebody staked out in the sagebrush, ready to ambush. When it was clear she was severely hypothermic and bleeding from her feet, they got out and let her in the truck cab. From there, it had to have been a terrifying experience for that girl. I sure wouldn't want 2 middle-aged rednecks picking me up 40 miles from any town. They cranked up the heat full blast and drove her to a nearby country gas station, where they were regular customers and friends with the owner and his wife, who was a retired nurse. When the girl could finally articulate her words, she told them that she and her boyfriend drove out there to drink and have sex. When she started having a seizure during sex, he lost his temper, grabbed her shoes, and threw them into the sage. When she got out of the car to find them, he peeled off, leaving her in near freezing temperatures in her skivvies. She estimated she walked about 4 miles on a dirt road before my dad found her. It's a good thing hunters start early because she easily could have died. When I was younger, I used to horseback around Northern California for weeks at a time. This was during the late 70s, early 80s. I rarely used a compass, but I always had a map of my area. I'm pretty good at dead reckoning via landmarks, and I've never been lost in my life. Except once. I was in the Six Rivers National Forest, heading south towards Trinity County. This is very rough terrain, lots of high ridges, steep hills, rocks everywhere, and nasty brush to tangle you. I was riding the ridges, heading generally south, and trying to find easy places to cross to the next ridge when it became convenient. The skies were partly cloudy, and it was cool 60 F. Cold for that time of year, since it was early August, and the temps were normally 90 plus F during the day. I found a reasonable spot to cross over to the next ridge south of me and started down. When I got into the ravine, it turned out that what looked easy from above was actually a rocky nightmare. I started walking up the ravine to find an easier place to get out of there. A wind picked up, and it started drizzling. I walked for a mile or so, couldn't find anything that I wanted to risk my neck on, and more importantly, my horse's hooves, and decided to start up the side I had come down originally. I got to the top, took a look around to orient myself, and froze in shock. The landscape was completely different. I don't mean that it was lower or easier or less rocky. I mean that all of my landmarks were gone. Some of them were peaks that were 30 to 40 miles away, others were a lot closer. It was completely different. I had no idea where I was, and I was completely disoriented. I dug out my map, and started to review where I was, the angles on the hills I had been navigating by earlier, etc. I couldn't find anything that matched. The only thing that I could positively identify was the route up from the ravine that I had just come up. Since it was cloudy, I couldn't navigate by the sun. All I had were the landmarks that I used for dead reckoning, and those were gone. The wind was picking up, and it was getting very, very cold. I almost expected snow. I had no idea where I was, so I decided to backtrack to my last known position and see if I could pick up where I left off. I started down the hill, got to the bottom of the ravine, and started the opposite direction up the ravine. This time I was very careful, watching for signs of my passage before, and the hill I came down in the first place. It stopped raining, the wind died down, and the day started to warm up. I found my original trail down the hill, started back up, and got to the top. All the landmarks were there now. I was totally confused. I kept going on the ridge, watching carefully to find where I had come up before. When I got to the spot where I thought it should be, there was no sign of it. I cast back and forth for a while, trying to find my trail with no success. All of my landmarks were there to see. Eventually, I gave up and continued on the ridge. A bit later, I found an easy trail down, and an easy trail back up the other side, and continued on my way. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Even though it was drizzling, I should have been able to see the closer landmarks, and honestly, the further landmarks were big enough to see. To that point, thinking back on it, there was no sign that it was drizzling when I continued on to where I had ascended the first time. And the temperature swings were wild that day. Easily 30-40 F. Not uncommon in the mountains, but really odd for that time of year in that place. Another thing. Originally, I had chosen to descend at that point because there was nothing to prevent me from going up the other side. I could see easily from the ridgetop. But when I arrived, there were tons of boulders blocking me that I should have been able to see from top. Eerie and creepy. At the time, sure, but I was more focused on trying to orient myself. But thinking back on it, even more so now.